Is it possible to clone dinosaurs? And will Jurassic Park ever be a reality? I'm Daniel, a molecular and computational biologist, and I'm going to explain why or why not. It helps to start at the beginning with Michael Crichton's excellent book on Jurassic Park. I think, in my opinion, this is the best sci-fi book because Crichton, he did his medical doctorate at Harvard, and his love for science is imbued in the text. You see so much serious engagement with science from the very start, and the whole idea of cloning that he has, that Spielberg masterfully adapted in the film, just shows this well. So the whole idea of cloning in the fictional world here is that you need DNA. Why is that so central? Well, because DNA, which is a long string of 4 letters, or 4 really nucleotide bases that we symbolize with letters. We have adenine, cytosine, thymine, guanine. Those 4 combine into really long strings of characters, and those code for all the proteins and all the regulatory functions that make up all organisms in the known universe. So it makes sense that DNA is so central. And we run into this problem: how do we get dinosaur DNA? Well, it's cool because in both the book and the film, the solution that Crichton came up with is that we need something to have dinosaur DNA that's going to be stored and safely secured over a long period of time, because the dinosaurs that existed most recently died 65 million years ago, and the oldest ones existed more like 200 million years ago. So how are you going to get DNA to last that long? The idea here is that, well, what if a mosquito bites a dinosaur? They suck the dinosaur blood, and then they get caught in amber. Okay, so this idea is really smart because once it's preserved in amber, the mosquito can last for a long time. And honestly, this preservation of ancient insects is very, very realistic. In fact, many extremely old insects and other organisms have been preserved way longer ago than even 200 million years. There are animals from this period called the Cambrian explosion that occurred about 540 million years ago, and they're preserved really well. We have insects that are preserved from 400 million years ago, and this is very realistic. Unfortunately, it's not as realistic for DNA to be preserved, and it's really simple why. When mosquitoes eat blood, their digestive system immediately starts digesting the contents of that blood. So the DNA is not really going to be intact for long, unfortunately. So for something like Crichton and Spielberg's model to happen in reality, a mosquito would need to bite a dinosaur and then immediately, like it quickly get frozen in amber, like without any digestion taking place. Like basically, like it would need to get frozen in the act of sucking up the blood. And even then there might be some problems, but that's not to discount the idea. I think it's really good. I think that is like honestly the best idea that someone could come up with, really, especially at the time, because it wasn't until a few years later that Dr. Schweitzer completely changed the game in terms of the potential for soft tissues in dinosaurs. In 2005, she published an article in the Science Journal, which is one of the top peer-reviewed scientific journals, that showed that T-Rex soft tissue is preserved, including blood vessel and blood cell-like structures. That's insane. So that went to show that dinosaur soft tissue can be preserved, which went totally against the idea that only dinosaur skeletons can be fossilized. That was crazy. And that, I think, is probably the most promising thing going forward for making dinosaur cloning a reality. Of course, it is very I don't want to say insurmountably difficult, but extremely, extremely difficult. But I don't want to say it's impossible. I think the biggest barrier to it will be whether we can get DNA or not. And I'm going to get back to that a little bit later because I want to cover some other challenges, other considerations that are worth thinking about. So we'll get to the DNA later, but let's say that someone is able to get the DNA and start the cloning process. Well, what does that look like? We can look at two case studies, Dolly the sheep and then Colossal Biosciences' attempt to make a woolly mammoth for inspiration. So with Dolly the sheep, the way that happened was they had a sheep that they wanted to clone, a full living adult sheep, and then they were experimenting with sheep eggs. So they would take the egg, they would remove the nucleus from that egg, so it's a denucleated egg, and then they would remove the nucleus from that healthy adult sheep, from any of its body cells, put that in the denucleated egg, and then have an egg ready to go. That's how they made Dolly. That goes against the grain of how biological organisms regularly work who are sexually reproductive, because normally you need one egg and then one sperm, and then you can start the creation of a new organism. But this is an entirely different way of introducing a so-called somatic nucleus into a denucleated egg. That's really fancy. Unfortunately, that won't work as seamlessly with dinosaurs because of at least two factors. One is that we don't have a pre-existing dinosaur egg that we can denucleate. And then second, we don't have another nucleus from another dinosaur that we can introduce. So that type of cloning is not what will happen if scientists are ever in the future able to get dinosaurs. But I think the second case study is a little bit more helpful for us. Colossal Biosciences is an organization that's trying to bring back the woolly mammoth for a number of reasons. For its scientific value, to understand how cold resistant animals function, and just for the intrinsic sake of doing something cool like that. They're really trying hard to do that. But I think there's a few things there that make it very possible. Honestly, I think they will do it. I think it's hard for sure, but I think it is not insurmountable. And let me explain why. One of the most helpful things is that we have a living relative of the woolly mammoth that is very closely related genetically. It's the Asian elephant. The African elephant is also quite closely related, but the Asian elephant is even more so. So we have an extant species that is very closely related. That helps a lot because the downstream idea is that once we get a woolly mammoth embryo growing, we'll implant it into a surrogate Asian elephant mother who will gestate and then give birth to the first woolly mammoth. And that, I think, is a very realistic scenario. There's difficulties, absolutely, but I think that's actually possible. So we have a living relative. That's awesome. But I think the biggest thing for sure is the fact that we have DNA exactly right now of woolly mammoths. We have the entire genome of woolly mammoths. That helps tremendously. Like, that is the blueprint that we need to create a woolly mammoth. And the only reason we were able to get the entire genome is because some woolly mammoths have been preserved in really well-preserving ice, and that has allowed their bodies to seem like they died not that long ago, when in reality they died thousands of years ago. That's awesome. So we have the whole genome, and we have a living relative. Those are two things that you really want to have if you're trying to clone an extinct species. So the idea they have is they'll make sure that the genome looks good. They will cut pieces of the Asian elephant genome and then insert the relevant pieces of the woolly mammoth genome into that using CRISPR. And then they're going to use that, put it in a denucleated egg, and then that's going to grow into a woolly mammoth or something pretty much pretty much very close to a woolly mammoth. That's the idea. I actually think they'll be successful. I think they have good funding, they have good people behind it, good scientists. I think they'll actually do it. Maybe not tomorrow. It might take 20 years, I'm not sure, but I think that is actually realistic. There are some serious difficulties to analogize that to dinosaur cloning, though. And so I think, yeah, we'll continue covering those. But let's say that we can get over those hurdles, okay? There are some real difficulties of bringing a park like Jurassic Park into being. Not just the operational side of things, which Crichton covers especially well. John Arnold in the book is a character who's played in the movie by Samuel L. Jackson. Arnold tells Hammond, hey, like, you have all the difficulties of a theme park like Disneyland, and all the difficulties of a major zoo like San Diego Zoo, and the added difficulty of taking care of animals that we've never encountered. And I think that third thing is especially key for us because there are a lot of things that go into enabling a dinosaur to live that we just don't know about, but the things that we do know about make it pretty difficult. So for example, the biggest reason why we're pretty confident animals, including dinosaurs, were able to get so big back in the olden days, by olden days I mean more than 65 million years ago, is because there was probably, like, we're very, very confident that there was more atmospheric oxygen just going around. Meaning, we think there was genuinely more oxygen, like a higher concentration available in the atmosphere back then. And that allowed animals to metabolize more and get bigger. There isn't as much oxygen today, so dinosaurs, even if we were able to clone them, would need to get over that hurdle. And Crichton just mentions that offhand in the book, like, oh, like, there was more oxygen back then. So would dinosaurs even be able to survive with less atmospheric oxygen? Maybe. They might be more lethargic. Very hard to know these things. There are other things as well, like who will take care of their poop? That sounds so random, but Crichton does a good job of outlining this difficulty when it comes to sauropod poop. Sauropods are so large that they have so much solid waste, and an idea he suggested in the book is maybe the bacteria that decomposed their poop in the past don't live anymore. That would make for a huge problem for Jurassic Park because what organism would be decomposing that poop? I mean, if it's going to be literally tons of poop per day, who's going to decompose that? If there's no bacteria to do it, it's just going to pile up. That's horrible. So there are practical considerations like that. That doesn't mean they're impossible or unsolvable, but those are some very real things. So even in a best case scenario, let's say we're able to clone a dinosaur, there are still going to be some downstream challenges to making sure that those dinosaurs can live, okay? But honestly, yeah, the biggest challenge in my opinion is getting the dinosaur DNA. And I think there's two possibilities for doing that. The first possibility is getting DNA from dinosaur soft tissue. This isn't as fanciful as it would have seemed like before 2005, before Mary Schweitzer published her paper showing T-Rex soft tissue preservation. I think it's not beyond the realm of possibility. If some T-Rex, which lived 65 million years ago, is ultra preserved in some really deep, maybe like below the ocean iceberg or something, maybe that might have some soft tissue that has some DNA. Of course, I'm not saying that's highly likely or for sure possible. I'm just saying I think it is conceptually within the realm of possibility. I don't think it's so astronomically impossible that that will never be found. Again, especially since we have found now multiple cases of Tyrannosaur, yes, but dinosaur soft tissue. So I think that's a more likely option. The second option involves using machine learning to try to backwards figure out the genome. What I mean by backwards is if you look at current living species that are closely related to the T-Rex, and you look at what's called a phylogenetic tree, it's basically a tree of life, and then you go backwards trying to predict the ancient common ancestor to current existing species, I think that could theoretically work, but there are real challenges involved there. For example, one of the biggest challenges is that we actually don't know how big the dinosaur genome was. It could have ranged remarkably. There's a group of organisms called the eukaryotes. That includes the animals, plants, fungi, protists. The genome size ranges widely in eukaryotes. At the smallest end, we have a fungal parasite, and its genome is 2.3 million base pairs long, okay? And at the large end, we have a Japanese flowering plant called Paris japonicus. Its genome is 150 billion base pairs long. By base pairs, I just mean letters that are paired with another letter, because DNA is double-stranded. So if we have an A paired with a T, that's one base pair. So 150 billion letters long, all the way down to 2.3 million base pairs long. So it's like, what genome size is likely? It's probably going to be likely closer to modern birds or reptiles than it is going to be to plants. Plants sometimes have much larger genomes, as we see with Paris japonicus. But still, it's hard to know. Thankfully, there are some genes that we're very confident that dinosaurs do have because they're so ultra preserved across the tree of life. For example, the lab that I work in right now, we study a group of transcription factors that are extremely preserved across all amniotes. So we are very, very, very confident that dinosaurs had the transcription factors that we study. So we know we know with confidence, or we're pretty confident that some genes that scientists study today were in dinosaurs. So that helps us at least have some idea, but that's not a lot. So I think there's two options that scientists trying to predict the genome through some computer algorithm have. One option is to just test out every single possible option and try to clone it and see if it produces a dinosaur. This is impossible, but let me explain why it's impossible. If there was infinite time, infinite resources, and people had infinite lifetimes, or at least could survive long enough to pass on their knowledge to the next person to take over, then I guess it could theoretically be possible. Again, if truly there was infinite time, resources, and infinite lifespan, infinite man hours. And the reason for that is because if you want to try out every possible combination of genomes between even the ranges of the smallest known eukaryotic organism and the largest eukaryotic genome, that would equate to 10 to the power of 90 billion possibilities. That isn't saying there's 90 billion possibilities. I'm literally saying it's a 1 followed by 90 billion zeros. That is insane. That is insane. For context, there are 10 to the 80th atoms in the known observable universe. So am I saying that there's 10 to the 10 times more possibilities? No, I'm literally saying that compared to the number of atoms in the universe, there are 10 to the 89 billionths more possible genomes in that space than there are atoms in the universe. So the number of possibilities is unfathomably large. So astronomically large. So someone could never, ever test all possible genomes, go through all the work of trying to clone it and see if it produces a dinosaur. I guess with infinite time, someone could do it. But we don't have infinite time. The second law of thermodynamics implies the eventual heat death of the universe. So we won't have infinite time. Maybe several billion years if humans live that long, but that's still, several billion years is not nearly enough time to test all the possibilities, unfortunately. So the second option is to again, like use machine learning to backwards predict the genome, at least to give maybe a few million likely possibilities, or maybe narrow it down to a few thousand possible genomes, and then test those select few. Of course, having a few thousand possibilities is a lot. Like that is a lot, and since we don't know what dinosaur genes do, even if we got the correct answer, we wouldn't know it until we put it into an embryo and see if it grows into one. This is a point that Dr. Wu explains so well in the book. Like, we don't really know what all the genome does until we clone it. I mean, we don't even know what all of currently existing organisms' genomes do. Like, we don't fully understand everything. That's why scientists continue to do stuff, let alone an ancient genome that we don't have on hand. The woolly mammoth, we have their genome on hand. Dinosaurs, we don't. But at least, I think conceptually speaking, some really good computer algorithms could come into being that help us predict at least some potential candidates. This is a lot harder said than done, and I don't think this would happen in the next 10 years. I think if humans live for another like 50,000 years, then I think something like this could be much more possible, because then some really advanced things could happen in the future that could help us predict with more precision than we could now, but it is very difficult. So is it possible to clone dinosaurs and make Jurassic Park? I think it is conceptually possible in the future if we either find some dinosaur soft tissue that has some DNA in it that allows us to build a genome, or we're able to predict in the far future some candidates for genomes based on computer algorithms. I think that would make it possible to at least get something growing, to actually birth that dinosaur and then have it live in the real world. And to overcome those challenges is another set of challenges, but I think those are less harder to overcome than the DNA problem. Those are some thoughts. Hope this is interesting, and thanks for watching.